Good.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, um, our mission and values. So it's mostly, what you'll see in the following slides is kind of breaking down some of these things that we keep ourselves busy with. Um, Educating voters, that's a huge part of what we do. Serving our community, certainly preserving democracy is something that serves our community. Supporting the leaders and who share our values, and you'll find that that's an active process. It's always a matter of communicating with legislators, city council members. They'll come out to our meetings and talk about what they're up to on a monthly basis. And then affecting change. Ultimately, this is about, winning elections, making sure that the people that we trust are in positions of power so that we can actually affect change that will improve the lives of people in our community. Okay. So a little bit about the geography. So this is the first legislative district, and I made sure to look this up. Right now, we have about 103,000 registered voters, and it's the first of 49 total legislative districts. And a little bit of background on that. There are
Plural.
four, oh yeah, there are 49 legislative districts, and they used to be numbered starting from east to west. So you'd see the small numbers in the east, and then you'd get to the 40s by the time you'd get to the Puget Sound. That's how it started, but in terms of how it's kind of evolved is as the population's been increasing in the western part of the state. Some of the legislative districts have actually picked up and moved, basically, so they've had to break up different areas of the Puget Sound area into smaller and smaller parts. And so the first, we actually used to be outside of Spokane, but yeah, it moved over here to the north end of Lake Washington. You see that our neighbors here, they're much higher numbered. So 45th to the south, 44th to the north, 21st to the far north, 32nd to the west, and then just across the border into Seattle is the 46th district. Um, so an interesting thing about legislative districts is that they redistrict every 10 years. And the first, you could kind of describe it as a bit of a young LD. And what I mean by that is that uh, what you see in this map is the breakdown of precincts. So every legislative district is built of a lot of precincts. And before redistricting, only about half of the precincts that are in the first right now were there before redistricting. So about half carried over into this new first district. And so that happened just in 2022. And so here we are a couple years later, and yeah, kind of building our community and figuring out how we want to move forward into the future. Um, so yeah, writ large, it makes sense as a community. We're made up of Woodinville, a small portion of Kirkland, Bothell, Kenmore, Olive Briar, all of Lake Forest Park. So, a lot of these places have very similar feels. They have a lot of the same kind of issues that they face, um, uh, how to balance growth and improve transportation. And, interestingly, what you find is that as housing prices have gone up, you see a lot of younger people that are moving a little bit further away from Seattle, where it's actually more affordable. So yeah, you'll see that that's kind of the case is that we have a lot of young folks in the first LD as well. Um, so one last thing is that the first LD is made up of 172 electoral precincts. Um, and of those, 66 of them currently have precinct committee officers, and we'll get into a little bit more about that. And those are marked in blue here. Mine is this little guy right here that looks kind of like an arrowhead. So that's the my neighborhood that I go and door knock a couple times a year. Okay. So we'll go into a little bit about the organization of the Democratic Party. Um, so here we are at the in the first legislative district. You saw that there were other districts to the north and south, King County and Snohomish County. Um, we're about a two-thirds to one-third split between King County and Snohomish County. Um, but yeah, each of them is organized separately. They're all independent of one another. They have different leadership. They have different revenue streams in terms of membership dues and how they decide to reach out to their community, um, all that. So one thing to note is that each of these have leadership, these executive boards. Um, and so I'd mentioned a little bit about board PCOs, which are precinct committee officers, people that are the local Democratic Party representatives in each of these precincts. So in order to be a board member, you don't necessarily need to be a PCO, but you do have to be a member of the LPO, which is the local party organization. Okay. Um, and we'll go a little bit more into membership on a later slide. Um, but these kind of roll up into county organizations. So, you know, every legislative district has its own Democratic Party organization, and each county does as well. And so they'll have borders that overlap quite a bit. Those actually just reorganized in December and have new chairs, Beth Baisley in King County and Robin McGee in Snohomish County. And toward each of these, each legislative district will send a couple of representatives that will make up that leadership body that will be the decision-making group for each of the county organizations. And then above that is the state Democratic Party, which is located in downtown Seattle, not Olympia. The state chair currently is Shasti Conrad. She is running for re-election to be for another term as chair. And that's going to happen in the first weekend of February, or sorry, last weekend of January. It moved dates recently. But what you'll see in terms of what constitutes the state Democratic Party is each of these lower organizations sends state committee members to make up the Democratic Party. So that was actually in the last term, that's what I served as, the state committee member to the state party. They'll meet about quarterly. Um, each of the county organizations meets monthly, and each of the legislative districts also meets on a monthly basis. Um, so, any questions on this?
Mhm. So we live in Edmonds.
Oh, sure. Oh, you live in Edmonds. Okay.
Yeah.
hmm
So we fall under the Snohomish County, but not the first. I guess I don't know what
Yes,
number
yes.
ours is.
Yeah, you'd be in the 32nd or the 21st district. Edmonds is divided between those two legislative districts.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it'll be a different organization. Um, let's see here. Anything?
Are there meetings that that all of Snohomish County Democrats?
Yeah.
Is that an
So
organization in itself, or is it better to be in the your smaller legislative
Yeah, let me think here. It's probably something you'll want to try out. You can certainly check out what's happening at the county level, kind of try it on for size and see how it feels. Legislative district as well. You know, in general, you can sign up for the emails and they'll let you know when the monthly meetings. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure when the 36th meets on a monthly basis. Um,
32nd, Marty, 32nd.
what did I say? Oh, it's 30 seconds. Sorry. Yes. When the 32nd meets, the first LD, we've been meeting traditionally on the fourth Thursday of the month. Yeah, but yeah, each organization's a little bit different. They'll have different leadership that approaches, what they'll try to accomplish a little bit differently. Okay, all right. So I talked a little bit about the board. This is the executive board. This is something that, at least in some form, each of the county and legislative district um, organizations will have. What they'll all have is they'll have a chair and a vice chair, as well as delegates to the county organization and delegates to the state committee as well. So those are actually statutory. Those are written into law that this is what the leadership should look like at a bare minimum. Beyond that, organizations will also have secretaries and treasurers. This is kind of an overview of what we do in the first. It's what's in our bylaws. But yes, as with all organizations, we have a chair. This is the person that calls and presides over the general meetings, um, and they'll actually they'll dip into a lot of different committees as well to keep the work going if needed. But yeah, it's basically the head of the organization, and then. Beyond that, there are also vice chairs. The first vice chair, their primary job is a lot like what the vice president of the United States is. There's no formal role except to stand in for, in this case, and stand in for the chair should there be an absence. Okay. Um, and let's see here. In the first LD, we actually have three vice chairs. Um, we have a first, second, and third vice chair. None of these have what you'd call a portfolio, which is like a defined job that they'll do month in and month out. But yeah, I think our vice chairs have generally kept pretty busy. There is a secretary. This is someone who records the official minutes uh, at each of the general meetings and the meetings of the executive board. So this is who is in charge of what happens at each meeting, so that if somebody misses a meeting, they'll be able to catch up on what's been happening. It's the official record. Treasurer is a role that can be somewhat complicated. This is about how the organization takes in our case, money from membership dues and uses it for things like outreach around election time, things that we do for get out the vote efforts. And it's complicated because there are reporting duties that have to happen toward the PDC, the Public Disclosure Commission. This is a state agency that oversees political expenditures in the state of Washington, makes sure that people are accountable for the money in and out, so that just as a matter of fighting corruption and making sure that there is sunlight, some amount of sunlight in our democracy. So, it's actually publicly available. People can go onto their website and look at, where different organizations and different candidates are getting their money from. Yeah, so the treasurer is basically making official the record of how the first LD is spending its money. Okay. We have a PCO coordinator, and this is somebody who organizes the PCOs. So monthly meeting that happens, making sure that things like recruitment of new PCOs, that kind of work will get done. So talked a little bit about the delegates to the county and the state. So the people that make up those bodies above the first LD. And then we also have a Young Dems delegate. So and maybe Andrew can uh, yeah, make sure that I'm right here. I think it's somebody who's under 25. Is that right? Or do I have the age wrong?
Says 35.
I think it was 35.
Oh,
Yeah.
is it 35? Oh, okay, cool. Got it.
I think you got it right in the slide here.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, is it? Oh, good Lord. I should probably. There it is.
There
Yes.
you go.
Under 35. Sorry, I haven't looked at this slide deck for a couple weeks, so
It looks good.
yeah. Um, and then also the first legislative district executive board has a couple of board members at large. So unlike some of these other positions in the table above, there aren't any inherent duties. Again, members who are without specific portfolio, but as I'll get into in later slides, there is a lot of work that always needs to get done in the Democratic Party. So they'll plug in where needed. They can also serve as chair of other committees, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And yeah, that last item, the committee chairs. So all of these form the executive board. So meet monthly, discuss what's happening in the district, plans for the coming months, and make sure that we're meeting regularly and yeah, doing the good work month in and month out. So in terms of these the chairs of each of the committees that are also part of the executive board. There are 6 committees currently. There is Comtech. I also took that into my portfolio in this this last cycle, but it's about making sure that you draw from other people who are willing to help, and you do things like make sure that the website gets updated regularly and reflects current information, that type of thing. Social media, which I haven't always had a lot of time for, but yeah, work like that. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. This is a committee that's making sure that the Democratic Party is always open in terms of how people can communicate and participate. So it's about making sure that the First LD organization as a whole is makes sure that belonging is something that that people feel in the organization, regardless of background. So the Elections Committee, as it's currently formulated, this is an especially busy committee around endorsement time. So as an organization, one of the key things that that we do is we get together and we endorse certain candidates who are running as candidates for elections. So it's up to the first LD um, to decide who gets the endorsements, but the elections committee actually conducts a number of interviews of candidates to make sure that they comport to the values that we hold. We check that they impress us with with their knowledge, with their dedication. So we make sure that the people that we endorse will do a good job in the job. The Issues Committee will again meet monthly, and this is about making sure that that there is a resolutions process, so that the organization can periodically declare that they support certain legislation or have something to say that's in current events, so that we're making sure that we're having our voice heard in the community at large, so that we're always saying month in, month out what our values are. And so it ends up being very busy around when the legislature is in session. Make sure that we support when we can specific legislation that we think would be good for the first legislative district. Yeah, and then the membership committee, that is a committee that again meets monthly, and this is just making sure that the membership roles are staying current and that we can properly credential people for some of the key votes that happen when our organization gets together. So that's a really key role. It's membership is who we are as an organization. The committee makes sure that that stays an organized process. And then the PCO committee, this is a group of PCOs that get together. Every PCO, and it's actually open to others as well, people that might be interested in being a PCO. This is about making sure that we can come together as organizers, share ideas, learn information, make sure that we can be more effective as a group in terms of how we reach out to the community. Okay. Talked a little bit about the membership options. So, as I mentioned, this is who the first legislative district is, and who is a member. So, first off, as I've mentioned, each electoral precinct has a seat for a PCO. Now, not every precinct currently has a PCO, but this is something that people can volunteer to do. But that is the first component of who is a member of the first legislative district. There are also people who pay dues, and we offer them at a variety of different levels for families, single members, and people on students and people that might not be able to necessarily afford a full membership. For those people who are interested in participating, we can offer membership at a reduced or zero cost. We want to make sure, as I've mentioned, that we're an open organization that is willing to hear from everybody, regardless of economic status. So, and it all comes down to, what does the membership do? The key thing there is we make sure that we endorse different candidates for election in the key positions year in and year out. And we decide as a body where to focus resources. So we'll actually look over the budget and decide how whether we're properly aligning our resources with our values. And then also those statements of values that I talked about, things like resolutions. We'll put them on our website and say, when it comes to this thing that's happening at the national level or the state level or the local level, this is something that we believe in or oppose. So that's a key part of what we do as an organization. And it comes down to those general meetings. These decisions are made based on voting at the general membership meetings. So we'll have key meetings for, when we actually have endorsements to make. Everybody will be part of that process, so they can vote up or down in terms of how to send out endorsements to for different candidates to office. So let's see here. Oh yeah, one final thing. People who are not necessarily residents of the First LD, they can, if they'd like to, be to join as an associate member. So we've had people who have been redistricted out of the First, and they still choose to participate. But in that case, they won't have voting rights in the First legislative district. Okay. And I actually haven't been pausing, but I can pause here for any questions that people might have. Okay, seeing none, I will proceed. So yeah, these key things that we do, it's about making sure that we can improve the lives of people in the first legislative district. So, that is a key thing, endorsing candidates, making sure that we're getting people into positions of power that'll make the key decisions at a community level. And let's see here, getting out the vote. That's something that we do twice a year, and it usually takes a few months to keep each of those things on track. And we'll go into the calendar in the next slide. But we do a variety of things. We'll mail different lists of endorsement to each of the household. Well, sorry. There we go. So yeah, let's see here. So we'll either be handing these out at the doorstep during door knockings. We'll also mail endorsements to households, and we kind of scale that based on resources that we have available and who we think needs to be reached out to remind to vote, and not just remind to vote, but vote for these particular people. Okay. So let's see here. And one of the key things about that get out the vote process is we try to make sure that I'll say that in this meeting, we wouldn't be here if we didn't care, if we weren't probably more informed about what's happening politically than the average American. But that kind of with that power comes great responsibility. It's incumbent on us to be comfortable to talk to people about the different laws and different decisions that happen at national, state, and local level that affect people's lives. So informing people is a key thing that we try to do as an organization. Yeah, education on local issues. You can see that things are a mess at the national level, but when it comes to what affects our lives day in, day out, most of the, well, yeah, I'll say most of the things that affect our lives day in, day out, those actually happen on the local level. That's why it really matters who's actually in these positions of power. So we try to make sure that we keep an informed group in the first. So, we'll hear from our legislators and our city council members at our general meetings, especially during times where really important issues are coming up. And sometimes they'll come in and ask for support. They'll want people to show up for city council meetings, key city council meetings where decisions are being made. So yeah, it's about that communication with different leaders at different levels that's really important for the first legislative district. And in terms of, I was working on this slide deck with our vice chair, actually, Amanda, and I did not look at the title that she gave this, Calendar of Perpetual Activities, which I like that, because it kind of is a good reminder that all this work, it's happening all the time. This is the kind of thing that happens every year, these first 5 panels. It follows a certain cadence. Actually, I'll say the middle 4 is the thing that happens every year. The first panel, reorganization, that's something that happens only every 2 years. So interestingly, each of the organizations I talked about in the previous slide, those actually reorganize every 2 years. They'll dissolve, and really anybody can step up to be a leader of these organizations. And so every 2 years, there'll be new leadership. We're going to go through that in about 8 days. We'll do it on the 22nd at 6 p.m. In the first legislative district. So yeah, that's noting here that it happens in January of odd years only. And let's see here. There are certain positions that only PCOs are able to vote for. So that first level of who makes up the Democratic Party at a very local level, that is the precinct committee officers, and they'll choose the chair, first vice chair, and other party delegates. So King County, Snohomish County, and state. But the other positions that I talked about, those are voted on by the full membership. Okay. Um, so the endorsement process, I talked a little bit about that, but uh, for the calendar, that actually happens twice. So it'll happen in the March to May timeframe in the lead up to the primary election. So the primary election, that happens the first Tuesday of August every year. Um, in the odd years, there are municipal elections, so we'll choose city council and sometimes mayor in the different communities of the first legislative district. Um, and let's see here, and then the even years, those are the congressional elections and federal elections. So, yeah, the presidential election that happens every 4 years. Now, we'll still make endorsements for even the highest office, but yeah, certainly the things that are most impactful are really happening at the local level during these odd years. So, we'll, as an organization, meet different candidates. There'll be an endorsement meeting that happens usually in the week or two after the filing period. So people will file for election. I think Anne already dropped off, but I know she knows off of the top of her head. I think it is the first week of May when that happens. So there is 1 week where people can file for office. They'll pay the fee that's different for every office, but yeah, it's as an organization, especially the elections committee, will see who's filed for office, invite them in for an interview, vet them, and then present to the body different candidates who are looking to be elected in that August primary. Now, you'll see that that's kind of a little bit of time between when we do these endorsements. We'll do them in the biggest batch will happen in May. There'll be usually a smaller batch in June, but that's still a couple months before August when the election takes place. And that's because as an organization, the first legislative district likes to put together a mailer or a walk piece, something that people can take door to door, or we can send directly to different voters. We are just as a reminder to vote. So it usually takes a little bit of time to put those materials together, and that's why we make sure that we have that window available to reach our the voters of the first legislative district. Okay. Now, following the primary election, sometimes we'll have to do another round of endorsement. That's because maybe the person that we chose to endorse in the primary election, maybe they didn't make it through, so we need to endorse someone for another position. So that's usually a much smaller batch that we'll take care of in the August to September time frame. And then that leads into the general election that happens the first Tuesday of November, I think, except for November 1st. It's never on November 1st. So, yeah, all that is where the bulk of the membership dues goes to. So we spend money on get out the vote efforts, but we also do things like pay for a Zoom account so that I can hold meetings like this, and we'll pay for the website, pay for an email domain so that we're able to communicate with voters. So yeah, just all those different things, and then we'll pay for facilities as well. We try to meet several times a year in person, and those certainly have a little bit of cost associated. But yeah, you'll see that we do fundraising efforts to make sure that we can reach as many voters as possible in the first legislative district. And one thing that I'll say regarding our outreach efforts, it may not seem like a lot, but making sure that we're letting people know who we as a party endorse, that actually does make a difference. You'll see that on average, a precinct that gets door knocked, where we choose some group of voters to reach out to, usually that'll boost our the turnout for that candidate by a good 2-3 points. May not seem like much, but there are a lot of very close elections that happen year in, year out. There are city council members that win by less than 10 votes. So every vote counts, and that's something we try to remember as an organization. So let's see here. Then I talked a little bit about things that happen. So this is the calendar that happens. We'll go through these 4 steps every year, reorganize every 2 years. But what's happening monthly is we're meeting as the entire first legislative district. We'll also meet, the executive board will meet. We're actually meeting just on Thursday, actually, in a couple days to plan, make sure that we've got all of our ducks in a row for the reorganization that's happening next Wednesday. And the committees, most of the time, they will meet on a monthly basis. I'll say that the elections committee, because there is quite a lot of work to do, especially in the odd years where you need to meet with a lot of candidates for each of our 6 cities, as well as, it's not just city council members, it's also judges and county council members. So you'll see that there are a number of different candidates that we'll want to meet with. So because of the close time frame, the elections committee will meet more frequently than monthly during those endorsement times. So the county party, those will meet every month, I'd mentioned, and then the state party, that meets about 3 times a year. So, okay. So I think that actually brings us to the end. Yeah, so I should ask first, any questions? I'd love to field any questions if you are unsure of party processes and all that. Yeah, Dan.
Yes, what's the relationship of the state party to the national party? And who elects the head of the national party?
Yeah. So that's a little bit of a complicated question. It's pretty straightforward this year. So let's see here. So starting at the very local level, these things kind of build up to the higher level. So I'd mentioned we're reorganizing as a district next Wednesday. Then that following weekend, actually, there is a state committee meeting, and the state committee will meet and actually choose their leadership to send to the DNC, which is then meeting the next week. So yeah, it's about kind of rolling up members. There are 4 DNC members that are voted on by the state committee. And those are the ones that those are some of the voters that will choose who the chair of the national party is.
So do we have any participation or does the representative at the state level poll the grassroots, are the districts at all for who's the
Yeah, so let's see here. We talked a little bit about the state committee. Um, so what populates the state committee is 2 members from each legislative district and 2 members from each county. And those are elected every 2 years. But there's some turnover that happens every year in terms of who makes up the state committee, but usually there will be people that are elected DNC members that have been in place for quite some time. I'll say that, let's see here. The 4 DNC members right now, most of them, well, let's see here. There's two of them that have been there for a while, Sharon Mast in the 41st and David McDonald from the 46th. David McDonald is actually the chair of the Rules Committee at the national level. So he's a pretty prominent guy. Um, let's see here. Javier Valdez is actually also from the 46th. He's a state legislator. Um, yeah, I've actually known him. So I've been involved in the party for about 8 years or so. And I got to know him before I was redistricted into the first legislative district. And then there is a final DNC member, Sophia Danenberg. I'm trying to remember what legislative district she's from, but she's really big into rules and bylaws as well. Um, yeah. Yeah, and so that those are the elected people to the DNC from Washington State, but then automatic members of the DNC from the state level, if I recall, I think it is the chair and the vice chair of the state party who are up for re-election that first weekend of, or sorry, that last weekend of January. So, yeah, next Sunday, I guess. Any other questions for me? And as I said, I've been involved in the party for about 8 years, which maybe it seems like a lot, but it's not really. I'm still learning. I still learn things, every single day, every single year that I'm putting in the work. But, it's really great to see everyone that's shown up and has interest in learning more about the first legislative district. And I encourage people who are interested to kind of take a look at different positions. I'll be sending out this slide deck to everyone who attended. And yeah, it's great to see everyone. But yeah, what I'll say is, what I kind of came into the party 8 years ago. It was right after Trump's election. It really shocked me to my core. And I certainly did not expect to see that it would happen again. But, here we are. Um, and so I came into the party and wondered, so how does this thing work? I had absolutely no idea. It took me, a couple months, and then I was precinct committee officer for my neighborhood because there hadn't been one for many years. Then from there, I became the membership chair of the 46th, and yeah, then I was served a term as vice chair and then served a term as the state committee member. So I've been doing that for 4 years. Currently, I'm the co-chair of the state technology committee. So we do things like make sure that every legislative district has the technology resources that they need to operate. Big push in the last 2 years has been about putting together a remote voting system. So that's where I put most of my efforts. But, it's just one of those things where I came in kind of wondering, why doesn't the Democratic Party do this or that? And it struck me pretty quickly that it really is just an all volunteer organization. At least at the legislative district and county level, it's an all volunteer group. So you wonder, why doesn't the Democratic Party do that? Well, it's because, you know, are there enough volunteer is there enough volunteer energy to do it? And are there people willing to step up and put in the work? So, yeah, it dawned on me pretty quick that, if I wonder why something isn't being done, then the question becomes, why am I not doing it? And so, I encourage everyone that's interested to, um, to seek different positions in the executive board, and beyond that, if you don't necessarily have time for the executive board, being on a committee, that's something that always needs more energy, more commitment from folks. So yeah, let me take a couple questions. So Dana, if I'm saying your name right.
Hi, I'm Dana. I just at the very beginning, what was your what was your what do you do? What's your committee that you're in charge of now?
Oh yeah, sure. So I do a bunch. I head the Communications and Technology Committee here in the first legislative district, but a good portion of the stuff I also do, I do at the state level because I'm the state committee member of the first legislative district. So yeah, I co-chair the committee at the state level. And so, yeah, it's working with different legislative districts to make sure that they have different the resources that they need. One thing that I'll say that's pretty interesting and important about being a precinct committee officer. These are elected every 2 years. So basically, the party is renewed every 2 years. But in between these elections of precinct committee officers, people can be appointed to vacant precincts. And one of the most important roles that the PCOs have is filling vacancies in the legislature, which happen every so often. One thing that's really been interesting that's happened in Washington State this cycle actually has been the new governor. He's actually picked a lot of legislators to serve in his cabinet and serve in his administration. So it's leaving vacancies in the legislature, and in that case, the PCOs actually convene and choose who should be the replacements to state legislature. So we've already had a couple of those that happened in December, and that's actually going to happen again this weekend. I'm actually helping out the King County and State Party run the tally on replacements. So that's going to be something that we'll be doing. It hasn't happened in the first as at least recently. It did happen in the 46th before I was redistricted. That was we had a replacement to the legislature because a state rep actually decided to run for mayor of Seattle. So yeah, you never know when it happens, but it's interesting when it does.
I had one more question. Do you
Yeah.
guys ever meet in person? And I also love this that you're telling us how this all works too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, we do meet in person. So we're still trying to figure out when we'll meet in person next. We're hoping that we're able to come together as a district in February. And then probably after that, we would meet at our summer picnic. So we have a summer picnic that kind of actually kicks off our Get Out the Vote efforts. And that happens in the middle of July. And we'll pick a park, usually someplace in the first legislative district. We've been having it in North Bothell for the last couple cycles.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and Josh. Let's see if he can come off mute.
Yeah, hi, sorry, I was
yeah.
in transit a little bit.
Sure.
You had mentioned that some of the positions require you to be a PCO, and I wondered if you could, if you could mention which ones those are.
Oh, sure. So I'll say that in order to serve, you don't need to be a PCO. You don't need to be a PCO if you want to serve on the executive board. What I had mentioned is certain positions are only voted on by the precinct committee officers, and that's by state law. Because according to So according to state law, the Democratic Party is the PCOs. And then there are a number of different positions that are elected by the full membership. Yeah.
But someone could be elected to those positions with that by not a PCO, elected by the PCOs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. Okay. And Rosemary.
So I just wanted to say that when I came into this organization, one of the most confusing things to me was the relationship between those levels of party that Mamadi described, the LD, the state, the county and the state. I thought there would be sort of a hierarchy of decision making, that if the state made the rule, everybody else had to fall in line. That's not how Democrats work. And you can get contradictory kinds of resolutions, endorsements of candidates. Just because the King County Elections Committee endorses a candidate doesn't mean the first LD will endorse the same candidate. And now it seems obvious to me, but I don't know whether anybody else has struggled with that, because you'll see it. And I also just want to, while I'm here, do a pitch. One of the best committees to get involved with is the Elections Committee, because you meet all these candidates on Zoom. You interview them. It's incredibly informative. And then it's great because some of them get elected and then you go, oh, I remember that person from when they did something in a Zoom interview. So I want to do a pitch. We always need more folks for the Elections Committee. Thanks,
Yeah.
Marty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, elections committee, very important. I was going to say that just doing things like door knocking, efforts like that, you just never know what can happen either. So I'll say that when I was early in my activism in the Democratic Party, we had a candidate that I was not familiar with down in the 26th legislative district. So this was outside of Gig Harbor. So, beyond just door knocking and working for people in the first legislative district, certainly in the even years, we'll make sure and try to organize canvasses for candidates outside of the first LD. And when I was in the 46, we actually decided to support a candidate down in Gig Harbor named Emily Randall. And as it turned out, I went down to a couple canvases down there, knocked, I think, about 50 doors total, something like that, over a couple afternoons. And as it turned out, when all the votes were tallied, she won her seat to the state senate by 104 votes out of, I think it was about 50,000 cast. So you never know what doors are the ones that are most important. So that's why it matters to do that kind of work. And she served very ably in the state legislature. She was always one of my favorites. Of course, I'm biased because I I did some of the work to try to get her elected. And then she just got elected to Congress. She's just was installed yesterday. So yeah, you just never know what's going to happen, with candidates. So but it's just a really meaningful thing to be involved and to take ownership of democracy in your community. So any other questions or thoughts? Okay, seeing none. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and by all means, reach out to me if you have any other questions. I'll be sending an email regarding, or to make sure that everybody has this slide deck for reference. So, yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and I will stop the recording.